Alright, so we've got 2 videos out there. Here's a third one talking about floats in your storage tank. So the first video is on how does this relay work. The second one talks about when you're using one of these relays to protect a centrifugal booster pump. Centrifugal just means it's an above ground pump. It's not a submersible pump. And so you're taking water storage and then you're producing pressure with a pump that's above the ground. Those are centrifugal pumps. It's kind of nice to have those because they're a whole lot easier to replace than a well pump in the ground. And so when you have that protection, you're going to use a different type of float called a pump down float. And so think about it as you could pump the water down until it gets to the level you set that float, and then it interrupts the power. A pump up float is going to say, hey, go ahead and run that pump to fill up the tank with water until it gets as high as we want it, and that float tells it to turn off. So that's the difference between those. But this one, we're going to talk about using this relay on another float. So you would typically, if you have a tank where you've got 2 water sources, you've got a what do you call it, where you've got rainwater coming in, or maybe you have another tank somewhere, a holding tank, and then you're going to have the what am I trying to say? You're going to have 2 water sources. Maybe you got rainwater, gravity filling into it. In that case, you don't need another one of these relays and another float. But if your rainwater goes into one tank that's kind of a holding tank, and you especially have this in the case where your big rainwater collection is uphill from your house and you can't just gravity fill into it. So you have a holding tank where all that rainwater goes into first, and then you have like a high volume, low pressure pump, almost like a septic pump, that is going to move that rainwater as it's filling that tank and then send it uphill into your larger collection tank. But let's say you've got one tank that it's going to send that to, and it's going to also be filled by your well water, but you want to use your rainwater first. So and then the well is a secondary. Usually what I do is I will let the rainwater pump run, and I have a float near the top of the tank, and it's got the fulcrum point of that weight, so it's always just operating at the top 200 or 400 gallons of the tank, something like that. Now you've got your submersible pump that's a well in the ground, and you want to use that just as a backup source. You would use another one of these relays and another pump up float, and you might put it like in the middle of the tank. And that one you might have a longer swing on it. I like to have that to where when the top stops working because it's your rain tank is out, or you don't have rainwater in there anymore, and so you'd have your fill float from the well running in the middle. You want to give the rain a chance to drop down a little bit lower in that tank, so that way you have an opportunity for the rain to fill that tank. And that's only really when you have 2 different pumps filling that tank. But let's say you do have your tank gravity filling, and it's the same tank that the well will fill when the gravity fill water from the rain does not fill it. Now you'd only have one of these on the pump up because you don't have a secondary pump filling from an alternate rainwater collection tank. So hope you're tracking me on that. But in the case where gravity is taking the water off the roof and filling your primary tank, and the well water is a backup, then it's just like the first video. You're just going to have a float near the top, and so when the rainwater isn't topping off that tank, then when that float goes down, it's going to go through this relay. It's going to it's going to continue that circuit and tell that submersible well pump to go ahead and fill the tank now. And then when rainwater is always topping it off, then you just don't ever have the float activating the relay on the submersible pump.